Genesis chapter 50. We have come to the final chapter in the book of Genesis, Bereshit. And we have recorded in the last chapter in 49 that Joseph's father, Jacob, also known as Israel, has passed away. He breathed his last. And so we had certain description of how they describe death. Because if you look at the words in chapter 49, it's all very visual, right? Taken the last breath and he went to join his fathers. Now in chapter 50, it continues from there. This is, and then, after that happened, chapter 50, verse 1 continues. And Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him. And this describes the mourning and how Joseph felt losing his father. This is probably right after Jacob drew his last breath. And then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him. And here, I think one of the things that you could see is the emotions, right? And kissed him. The emotions of losing a loved one in the old days and today, it's the same. Because of the relationship that Joseph had with the father and finally was reunited with the father. And now the father has since passed on. And so after he gotten his composure, verse 2 happens, Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. This comes from an old word that talks about put spices to it. But because he was in Egypt, it looks like that they would follow the burial procedure of the Egyptians in embalming his father. In the traditional way, they would put spices and wrap the body around. In this case, whatever they may have done, the physicians embalmed Jacob, most likely from the Egyptian style of embalmment. This is their treatment of the dead. Now we can see from the customs that there were 40 days that were required for him in the embalming stage, right? So such are the days required for those who are embalmed. So in the process of embalming Israel, the physicians require 40 days to let the body settle and things of that nature. And interestingly, you find that the Egyptians actually mourn for Israel, mourn for Jacob. In this case, the word mourn is to weep. They cried for Israel, for Jacob, 70 days. So it would be 40 plus 30. That was probably how we would calculate this, right? And 70 days. After these days of mourning has passed, the English word is mourning, but the Hebrew word is to weep, to cry, to shed tears, to feel sad. And in this case, feel very sad. So one of the things we would notice from a customs is that people do express grief for the loss of a loved one. And so it is nothing wrong to cry, nothing wrong to weep. And we feel sad because somebody has passed on. In this case, it's Jacob. But after the mourning period is over, life continues. And the process is required to continue with the burial and the last instructions of the dead. And so what we do read in verse 4 is, after the days of the feeling sad, the crying, the grieving, the mourning were past, it was over. we see Joseph went to speak to the household of Pharaoh. Although Joseph may be number two in the land and has taken charge of Pharaoh's household, the children and the people close to Pharaoh were the ones that will be in constant touch with the Pharaoh, not Joseph, even though he was number two. Here, he asked for a favor. That is how he expressed the favor. If now I have found favor in your eyes. So you remember all these are peculiar words. Favor in your eyes. Grace. Favor is grace. And so Joseph is asking for a favor. Now, if Joseph is asking for a favor, first, he must find favor in the people who he is going to ask favor for. That there must be grace in their eyes to want to do something for him. And hence, this idea of favor and grace, we must be very clear that there is no such thing called unconditional grace or unconditional favor. It is always with condition that the person you are asking favor from or asking grace from must first see you with grace or favor. And that is why Joseph said, if now I have found grace in your eyes, and if that is the case, I want to ask for a favor. What is that favor? Please speak. Please speak in the hearing of the Pharaoh, saying, my father has made me swear. Now, you must understand in the Hebrew context of swear, you say, as the Lord lives, 7 times that promise you make must be honored because you're doing it by the name of God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And because of that, we would say in our present day, die also must do. And that is the understanding of swear. And so he approaches Pharaoh and asks them to say, please speak. Let Pharaoh know. This is what my father made me swear. Now, obviously, you would think the Egyptians say, what do I care about your Hebrew practice? But he is asking for a favor, something unusual that is not normal in the Egyptian way of life. And he says, this is what my father said. Behold, I am dying. In my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now, we need to understand today when we say, my grave, which I dug for myself, seems to be a hole in the ground. But in the ancient days, it is a hole in the wall of the cliff of a hill. And so this would be where Abraham is buried. Now, therefore, please let me go and bury my father, and I will come back. It is to promise the Pharaoh that he is not going home and then he's never coming back. Pharaoh needs him to run the country. So he says, let me go and bury my father, and I will come back. And here, bury my father is to place his body in the grave. Now, chapter 5, the grave is a specific word, and we will call it, I think tomb will be a easier way. Or there is an old English word called sepulchre. That would be a place where you place the dead. And so the English word is grave, but that is not the Hebrew word, right? The English word only. So sepulchre or tomb, which Jacob say that I have dug. Now, what is dig here is really to dig a hole, right? Dig a hole in the land, right? The earth. And this is the location. This is the same word for earth. the land of Canaan, and there you shall bury me. Bury is also an old word. It is to gather me to my fathers, to gather me, gather the dead. So this is this word bury. We only see bury as, dig a hole and put in the ground. But in the ancient Hebrew concept, the burial is for them to gather with those who have died. Okay, that is what this means. And so Joseph is explaining this. This is the Hebrew concept. But I will come back. I will come back. I'm going to Canaan and I will come back. Now in verse 6, Pharaoh said, go ahead. You notice that in this conversation, Pharaoh understands Joseph. Pharaoh loves Joseph. Even though this is not a normal request, this is a Hebrew request. And Pharaoh knows that Joseph is Hebrew. He says, go, bury your father as he has made you swear. Do not break your oath. That is Pharaoh. So Pharaoh really treats Joseph as his right hand. That whatever you have made a promise, and in this is the Hebrew way of making an oath, go and honor your father. Do what he has asked you to do. But in this case, you just look at verse 7. Joseph went to bury his father. And notice, went up. We have always seen up and down. From Canaan, they will go down to Egypt. And when they take the reverse route, they will be going up to Canaan. You go down to Egypt, you go up to Canaan. So Joseph is going up to bury his father. Now, who goes with him? And with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. And you find that this is like a royal send-off. It's a royal send-off for the father of the prime minister, the number 2 of the land. And so you can see that the people in Egypt honors Joseph and then honors Jacob, the father, as one of the royalties, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. This was the entire family. So both in Egypt and both of Israel. Only their little ones, their flocks and their herds, they left in the land of Goshen. Meaning the young children did not follow in this long journey. And there they went up with him. Again, notice, went up. So you know where the direction they're going. They're going towards Canaan. Both chariots and horsemen. And it was a very great gathering. I'm sure that if you look at this from their time, this was a royal burial, right? A royal burial, a royal send-off. Now, as they come towards Canaan, this is what happened. They came to the threshing floor of Atad. And it seemed, we don't know really where this is, but it was across the Jordan, right? It's called beyond the Jordan, but across the Jordan. And it was probably one of the more fertile places. Now, we don't see that today. When you go to this place that is across the Jordan at the northern side of the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea, there is nothing fertile. But at that point in time, they came to this place, which is a threshing floor, and they mourned, they cried there with a great and solemn cry. Lamentation, to lament, to cry, to weep, right? And this is another 7 days of mourning for his father. You see the ritual they go through. They have cried for 70 days, then they go on a journey, and here they have another burial service. And it is not the place where they are burying. They are at a place where they can all gather together. For 7 days, they will cry. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. Because they saw the great Egyptian groups, the elders of the house, and all the royal Egyptian, the leaders, all came. And so the name was called Avel Mitzraim. Avel would be the meadow of Mitzraim, which is Egypt. Because they saw so many Egyptians here. So this was the place where the Egyptians gathered. Interestingly, they didn't see Jacob because the entire procession, the people who were there, they were noted and they could be identified as Egyptians, Mitzrayim. That's the ancient Hebrew name for Egypt. And so this is a place beyond Jordan, and it was a place where they gathered. Now, in verse 12 to 14, I just want to draw your attention to this. And so his sons did for him just as he commanded them. This is important because the instructions were given to Joseph, but Joseph represented all the brothers because Jacob had told Joseph, bury me in the place where my fathers lay. So his sons, all 12, did for him just as he, Jacob, had commanded them. So telling it to Joseph is as good as telling all the sons because it is a representation. Okay, that was in the end of chapter 49. So all the sons got together and carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre. This is in Hebron, which Abraham had bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as a property for a burial place. And after this, he had buried his father. Joseph returned to Egypt, and he and his brothers, all who went up, all went back to Egypt. Now, at this point in time, I want to show you Machpelah. This is the famous place where, at this point in time, Abraham was buried, Sarah was buried, and you will find Jacob is to be buried. Now, before this, we also have Rachel, who died. But Rachel was not buried here. Rachel was buried in Hebron, which is before he arrived at Mamre. Let me show you a couple of pictures because last November I went to Machpelah and it's still a site that we can see, and I'll show you some pictures. If you look at this picture, I want to point out to you a couple of things. Machpelah is also accepted as a sacred place for the Muslims as well. What we see here is, we see right here, this is now made into a mosque. On this side is a synagogue. And so the entire place called Machpelah is combined together under both Muslims and Jewish control. And they have finally decided that they will build on top of it, and they would have a door that will separate the synagogue from the mosque. But the two buildings are actually connected to each other. And during festivals, they have agreed that when the Muslims have a festival, they will open the door and they would have enough place for everybody. and the Jews will not go in. And when it is a Jewish festival, the mosque will open the door and the Muslims will not go in. And the Jews will use the entire place because they will have enough space. We are walking at the side here. And so we are walking up towards the Muslim place. And so we would take this route, and this is how it's done. The door opens and we will go in, we'll walk all the way up the stairs. And once we are at the stairs, we make a right turn, and then we head to where we saw that big building just now. When we get into the big building, it would be like any mosque. When you go into a mosque, it is empty. There is nothing there. And so we would walk in to the mosque, and we will go in and we will take a right turn. And we are now in that big building. Once you're in there, we will see the maqam. In Arabic, it's maqam. In Malay, we have the same word. In Hebrew, we also have a place called a word called maqam. These are the maqams. Okay, and there are 4 of them, if I'm not mistaken, in the Muslim side, and there are 2 of these in the Jewish side. Now, why are there 6? Then you remember in Maqpala, where we are talking about, we would have 6 persons buried there. And the 6 persons would be Abraham and Sarah. We would have Isaac and Rebecca. And then we would have Jacob and Leah. And thereby 6 of them in there. This is not the original of the hole in the wall. This is on top of that hill. Where they were originally buried is below. What you see up here, these things are just constructions that represent a tomb. What is there would be below. And that whole place below would be a cliff, a hole in the hill that was used to bury 6 persons. And you could see from a different angle the 2 of them. Now, one of them is kept locked away. And this one here is the tomb of Abraham. And because Abraham is more popular than all the 6 of them, they lock this up and wall it so that people don't go and disturb. Again, I mentioned to you, this is just the upper part where the Muslims build a shell on top. What is really original is underneath the building, which is the older tombs. This is where you see the tomb of Abraham. And this door here separates the synagogue. Over behind the door will be the Jewish side, which is the synagogue. And there will be 2 more tombs over there. And so this is the famous site called Maqpala. So what I have just shown you is the cave of the field of Maqpala. This is the place, and that's the name. And so one of the things that you would notice is that if that is where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob, and Leah were buried, that would be a big place if you look at it. And I had a chance to take a look at underneath that place, and it is really a huge cave, Now, I've never gone down. I've only seen it from the top. But whatever it is, I just wanted to show you that this little place is not, this place where Abraham bought is not a little hole. It is a huge field with a big rock, cliff, hill, and this was dug into the hill. And what we saw, the building was just above that tomb. All right. Now we look at the next part, verse 15. Now that all the burial and all the processions and all the procedures were all completed, and they have gone back to Egypt. Here lies the next piece of the conversation that we need to pay attention to. The attention is this. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us. And I would reckon to you that this word hate is satam. And satam means to have a grudge, to retain enmity, right? To bear a grudge. And this is normal because you remember the brothers did all these things against Joseph. And if Joseph is the kind of person who will bear that grudge and remember all the bad things they had done to him, almost killed him, sold him into slavery and forgot about him, now the brothers are recalling, all these things we did. When Jacob was around, Joseph dare not do anything because in respect for Jacob. But now Jacob is dead. Will Joseph do this to us? And they were thinking to themselves that actually repay us for all the evil we did to him. Now, again, I want to point out the word evil. Evil cannot be always assumed as morally bad. The word evil would be what was not intended, what was not designed, what was not wished for, what was not desired in the person that the evil is spoken of. And so evil would be to Joseph. That was not what he was expecting. That was what was not intended. That was what he did not desire, but the brothers did to him. And so that is called evil. Now, thereby we saw that they lied to the father. They threw him into a well. They sold him to the Ishmaelites. And the Ishmaelites sold him into the Egyptians in the house of Potiphar. Though he rose the ranks, that he got conned and caught for being honorable, and he was framed by Potiphar's wife, thrown into jail, lived in jail, and yet he rose the ranks. Why? Because God could see that he was honorable. He was faithful. He had integrity. He knew God, and he did not had any blemish at all. And so God gave him the ability to interpret dreams and thereby used him to save the Israelites. And so in verse 16, the brothers were so afraid, he sent messengers to Joseph and said, before your father died, he told us this, you shall say to Joseph, I beg you. In verse 17, this beg is to beseech. Like I pray to you, right? That is a beseech. It is just pleading, right? That's what it means. Please forgive. This word here, forgive. What does it mean to forgive? This is not the normal word. This Hebrew word says to lift up. Lift up. Lift up what? Lift up the trespass. Now, we use this word trespass, but basically, the word here is rebellion. The word here is rebellion and not sin. The word here is Pesach. It is Pesach. Pesach. Pesach means an intentional offense that they did to Joseph. And the English word is trespass. It is to rebel, to go against Joseph. And hence it is intentional. The other word is commonly translated as sin, which is chatat, which is not used here. Chatat would be careless, unintentional. And so the phrase here is, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin. And the word sin here is in the singular, the sin of their brothers. And what they have done careless. Okay, let me just put this down. They may have rebelled and done intentional and sold you out, but they didn't really thought that all this would come to this point. In their moment of anger, they did certain things. And so this is called evil to you. So if we do evil to God, it has to be seen from God's eyes. Evil to Joseph has to be seen from Joseph's eyes. And evil would mean all the things that is not desirable to Joseph, that Joseph considers it to be bad, that Joseph considers to be not good, not working out, not his plan and not his desire. All of them had done two things, intentional and unintentional. His rebellion, and their carelessness. What is their carelessness? They hurt Jacob by telling him a lie. But then they rebelled against Joseph and sold him away. And so these are two things. One is intentional and one is careless. And so their pleading is now, please, forgive, lift up. Translated as forgive. What do you mean? It means to lift up this burden and take it away from them. Right? And they call themselves the servants of the God of your father. We serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We would do what we need to serve him. Please lift this burden up from them. That's what it means to forgive. To lift it up and take it away. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. You see, one of the things that we must always remember is that these unresolved emotions must be resolved. Because you have seen over and over again, when they did it, after they did it, they realized they did something bad. But they cannot undo it, and so they carry this burden with them. Both the intentional of selling him or wanting to kill him and sold him away to the Egyptians, and then to tell the father that he has died. Both the trespass and the sin of carelessness is a burden they have carried for years. Now that Jacob has died, they are feeling the burden once again. And so when it came to Joseph and said that, and you would see this happening where Jacob was so afraid of Esau because he took the blessing of Esau. And Esau was so angry that he wanted to kill him. And so after a long time where he married the two wives, Leah and Rachel, and had 12 sons together with Bilhah and the handmaidens. And they came back and he had to make peace with Esau. But Esau had already gone past that and had forgiven Jacob. But this meeting had to happen because this burden that Jacob had to be removed. This is the word, forgiven. Lift up. And so the brothers had to deal with Joseph. And so one of the things we need to learn is if we carry this kind of a burden that we have wronged somebody, we have to deal with it. And so they came and they were humble when they spoke to him, and Joseph wept. And that is a clear sign to say that Joseph had also gone past, like Esau. That is over. Nothing to be worried about. And so in verse 18, his brothers also went, fell down before his face. This is pay homage. It's like what we translate as worship, right? But as I mentioned to you, I didn't like the word worship. And so falling down before his face, begging him, behold, we are your servants. Now, one more time, I want you to remember that when Joseph was younger, he was called a dreamer because he dreamt that 12 sheaves and 11 of them would bow down before him. Remember, this is another fulfillment. He also dreamt of the sun, moon, and stars all bowing down before him. And that happened already. So all these falling down before Joseph is a fulfillment of those dreams. Okay? Those dreams. And so Joseph said, do not be afraid. This is his first consolation. Don't be terrified. Don't be afraid of me. Right? Do not fear. This is the same word when we talk about fear God. Don't fear. And how did he express this and comfort them to give them the assurance not to be afraid of Joseph? This is the case. They had presented themselves as the servants of the God of your father. Notice? And Joseph said to them, am I in the place of God? Or am I God that you should fear? That is what it means. And so, in converse, Joseph is saying that, don't be afraid. I am not God. You should be afraid of God. You should fear God. I am not in the place of God, so you should not fear me. That is what this verse 19 actually means. Then he explained, but as for you, you meant, now the word meant is plan. You planned evil against me. Again, I ask you to remember the word evil is not moral evil. It means things which Joseph did not expect, that Joseph felt it was not desirable, not what Joseph wanted, and that was evil. These brothers had planned and devised a scheme to do something to Joseph that was not what Joseph had wanted. And so that is what it means that you plan evil against me. And now after all these things have happened, Joseph recounts all this and say, you know what? Long story short, God devised it for good. And in this case, good would be to God. This is evil to Joseph. You see that? We must be very clear on these statements. It is not good for Joseph. It is good to God. God took what the brothers had made bad for Joseph, and since Joseph was honorable, respectable, had integrity, God used him for the good of God's plan. What was that plan? In order to bring about it as to this day, to save. In verse 20, the word here is to save many people alive is one word. Okay. So to save alive is one word. There is no, how should we say? There's no word for save, unfortunately, but the English uses it. I think this one is best explained as to keep alive. Not save alive, but to keep alive, to maintain these people from the household of Jacob alive. And Joseph is explaining, what you had tried to do to me, God took that whole incident, and I had gone through all this, and God used it such that he would bring all of you into Egypt and thereby will not die in the famine and will be kept alive. And that is what it means. So now, therefore, do not be afraid. Do not be terrified. Do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. The word kindly to them is from his heart. That he loved them. He dealt with them as a brother. He dealt with them fairly. That's what kindly actually means. From his heart, the way he gave himself to them. And thereby they were comforted. So that they would be consoled. I think would be a better word, right? Console. And this word would show that they were so sad and they were so sorrowful that they did all this, and they were so remorseful. And I think you could treat that as a repentance. And so Joseph forgave them, lifted up their burden. Don't worry. All these things, God had turned it around and had made sure that his children will be provided for, and I will provide for you and your little ones. And this is a very key segment in chapter 50 as it rounds up all the bad things that had happened and they had schemed, and yet God treated this and turned it around because Joseph was honorable. And so Joseph is a special character in this book. And they were comforted. Now, our last part here, from verse 22, a long time would have passed. And so one of the things that we have to try to understand in such narratives is, there are certain things that is spoken together, and then time have passed, and then next things happen. And so Joseph, after this, Joseph lived in Egypt. Who else? He and his father's household. Remember, 66 came in plus 4 from Joseph. That would be 70, and it grew in number. And Joseph lived 110 years. That's a long time. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. And that's important. What does it mean? It means this. We have Joseph. And then we have Ephraim and Manasseh. And Ephraim had 1. And then Ephraim had 2. So it sees that Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. And in 3 generations, this is what we would see. This is 1, 2, and 3. This one here would be the grandchildren of Ephraim. But 3 generations will be the great grandchildren. And so you would see that Joseph had a long life, and Joseph was alive to see 3 generations down. His great-grandchildren, the children of his children's children's children. Okay. And then he said, then the other one would be Manasseh. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. So all of these people joined together, and this is now speaking about Joseph. It is his dying time. And so he said this, and Joseph said to his brothers, I am dying. Now we don't know what he's dying from. Maybe it's old age. But verse 24 says, I am about to die. But God will surely visit you. And so when Joseph said this to his brethren, it is not just the brothers, but it would be all of the descendants that God will one day definitely visit you. Verse 24, and Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, and God will definitely visit you. This word visit you would mean pay attention. Right? Visit you means God will pay attention to you. God will come and check on you. That is what this word actually means. And then he will come and he will bring you out. The word is to bring you up. Why? It's because they would leave Egypt and return to Canaan. And so they will have to go up. It is not out. And so the word here is up, of this land of Mitzrayim to the land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that would be what we know as a promised land, as God has promised to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. Verse 25. And Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely pay attention. He will come to pay attention to you. He will come and show himself to you. He will come and do things with you. That is what it means, visit you. Right? It's not a visit Egypt year, but they will come and visit one day. And you shall carry my bones from here. And so the idea here is when you leave this land and go up to Canaan, bring my bones, because I would have died long ago. That is what Joseph actually means. So Joseph died being 110 years old, and they embalmed him Egyptian way, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. This is not the Hebrew way of a burial. The word here, interestingly called coffin, it is an ark. It is a chest. And we use the word coffin, of course. Okay? It is actually a box that you cover. And so the ark uses this word, a chest uses this word, a coffin uses this word, and a box uses this word. So the translators use the word coffin, but it is the same word in the Hebrew. It is a box that has a cover. It is like a chest. It is gathering everything and putting it into a box. And so we talk about gathering, right? The dead. And so that is a symbolic way of putting everything together, that Jacob is going to gather with his forefathers, and Joseph is put in this coffin, or the ark is gathering towards his fathers. But he was placed in Egypt. And so when the time we leave the book of Genesis, I want you all to remember that there is a prophecy. And this is the prophecy. That one day, God will surely come and visit you, will pay attention to you again. and then take you out of this land, take you up from Egypt to Canaan, to the land that God swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that is what we call the promised land. And Joseph made the children of Israel swear. You see? It is so important that he wants to make sure that when you leave Egypt, I am coming with you. Bring me away. Bring my bones with you. And so when we go into the book of Exodus, we will read about this. And then when he ended in verse 26, they have not left yet. So we call this a prophecy because it talks about something in the future, that God will come and visit them and pay attention to them and deal with them one more time. Which means at this point in time, they have not seen God work with them for a while until the Exodus. And hence, when we start our book of Exodus study, we will have to remember Genesis chapter 50, especially verses 24 and 25. And with this, we end the study of the book of Genesis in closing of chapter 50. Any questions?
Pastor, does it mean that Joseph, according to verse 24, Joseph died before all his brothers? He died earlier.
It appears so. It appears so. We don't know for a fact, because when he says to his brethren, we don't know whether it's to all his 11 or some. Because Joseph was amongst the youngest of the brothers. So I would say that this is representative of all the brothers. But I don't think it would be all 11 brothers.
Okay.
Because his older brothers are far older than him.
Yeah. And what about the embalming? Is it according to the Egyptians, the way like the mummy?
I think so. I'm not sure, but the word that is used for embalming Joseph as well as Jacob comes from the word to put spices, right? To put spices, which is typically a Hebrew practice. But it also has a second meaning of the Egyptian way of embalming or treatment of the dead body. We don't know for sure, but maybe not. But in this case, I think it would be, because otherwise, I think they would be parading them in the Egyptian style of mausoleum. But I don't know for sure.
If this embalming, that means it won't be left bones, is it?
If it was embalming, it would be over time. Well, it will become bones. I mean, mummies are also just bones. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe not. Yes, embalming is an Egyptian way of treatment of the dead. But it uses a very Hebrew term that is with regards to applying spices, which is a very Hebrew concept. All right. Now, but the English translation here uses the word embalm. So it kind of confuses whether is it the Hebrew way of wrapping it in spice, or was it embalming of the Egyptian style? Not certain, I guess. But maybe. Joseph to the Exodus, the death of Joseph to the Exodus is likely to be about 300 years.
Our Malaysian culture, the way we embalm the dead, it's not with spices. Ours is with the chemicals. So it will be different from the Egyptian.
Yes. So even when we say embalm, it's not embalming. We use chemicals just to prolong the decay.
Preserve.
But eventually it will decay. It will decay. The Egyptian had other purposes of embalming because they believed that the afterlife requires the body. But here, clearly, Joseph believes that he will be in bones. So his bones will be carried out from Egypt to Canaan when they leave.
So, Pastor, do you think that we Christians should not cremate because the bones, in future, bones will be called up to be alive again? Because in the Bible verse, they will say in the end times, they will call out the bones. But if we already cremated, there won't be any more bones. It will be all ashes.
Well, if you look at the biblical text, there is no concept of cremation. Cremation is still a modern day practice. And it was introduced particularly when it is difficult to find places to bury. And hence, the Bible picture that is given has always been one of putting it into a box, putting it into a hole, carrying the bones, keeping the bones. And that is the concept of burial. Yes, there were also imagery of the bones coming alive in Ezekiel chapter 37. And the bones coming together, the nerves and the muscles come together, and they all become alive again one day. So the picture of death is bones, right? Yes.
So if we cremate, no more bones already.
Well, like I said, it's a modern concept of cremation. We don't have places to bury, so it is just to facilitate the idea of a burial. But you need to understand that in Genesis chapter 3 is where we get our idea of return to the dust of the ground. And that would be literally the visual imagery of ultimate death. So cremation is actually to bring the body to that point in time, right? To that point in time. Bones also will decay. It takes a lot longer. Bones does not last forever, but it does last a long time. Otherwise, you will all be seeing, where are all the people who have died in the past? Where are their bones? Right? But you don't find them.
So eventually, whether
it
bones
will return to
or
the dust.
ashes
Yes.
will return to the soil.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. We shall end here, and I trust that you all have had a good chance of going through the book of Genesis. I would encourage you to read again the book of Genesis, and now you've got the videos to assist you. Don't need to watch all the 50 chapters of video. When you need help, go through the video or the section of the video. That would be how I would use the videos as a reference. And so that you make your study your own personal one and not something that you just heard from me. And I trust that we have learned a little bit more about the Hebrew culture, how it all started. The reason why I felt so strongly about the book of Genesis is because this is where it all begins. The origins of all the concepts, the ideas, the words, the practices, the learning about God. And so when we come to the end of chapter 15, you would see that they do not interact with God every moment of the day. And you will also see from the prophecy that God will appear to them one more time after a long time. And so God is not the interaction on a daily basis kind of God from what we can see in the book of Genesis. At specific points in time, God appears to them. God even appears to Pharaoh to the king of the Philistines, to Abimelech, to Laban, to people who don't know him. And they seem to know God. But the way that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all these people called the children of God, the children of Israel, treated Jehovah God is very different. Not only do they know him by name, they know him as the only true and living God. And so in the prophecy is to tell us that one day God will come again. And so along the way, you will find when we begin the book of Exodus that they will cry to God when they needed him the most. And so hereby in book of Genesis, I urge you all to study it so that you can see how to relate to God, who God is, how did people live in those days, and how we should live and how we understand God. And that is why the book of Genesis is so, so important. And I'll leave that to you. Our next book of study will be the book of Exodus, of course. We shall begin next week. Okay, bye.
Bye, Pastor.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, Pastor.